Hi everyone. This episode we spoke to journalist and author Lucy Jones about her book, Losing Eden, which details why our minds need the wild. Our conversation touched upon how nature, along with more traditional treatments, was important for her recovery from addiction and other mental health issues, and the role of our relationship to the natural world in mental health, as well as much, much more. If you enjoy the episode, please give us a rating and a review on iTunes. Hi Lucy, how are you?
Hi, I'm well, thank you. Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, no, I'm very well, thanks. So to start with, we always ask about what your kind of relationship looks like with mental health.
Sure. So, personally, I've had kind of struggles with mental health, I guess, since my mid to late teens, spells of depression and anxiety, and quite a major episode in my mid-20s of addiction related to depression and anxiety. And then I've also had postnatal depression. So yeah, it's been an up and down journey personally for me. At the moment, I feel good. I use a variety of things when I'm not well: medication, psychotherapy, and nature, which I'm guessing we'll go on to talk about. Professionally, I have been working and writing on my book, Losing Eden, Why Our Minds Need the Wild, which is about the relationship between the natural world and mental health. So over the last kind of 7-8 years or so, I've been reading and researching in the area of mental health and well-being and the more kind of severe mental illnesses in relation to both nature-based interventions and connecting with nature, but also in the context of our kind of estrangement and disconnection from the living world in our kind of hyper-industrialized societies. So yeah, mental health figures in a pretty big way in both my personal and professional life.
Yeah, so you said both just then and in your book that there are kind of 4 elements to your recovery, but that nature played a major role. So I was just wondering how those 4 kind of things interacted.
Sure. So this is so I guess when the kind of period of mental ill health that my book starts with was I guess it was a kind of a mental breakdown in a way, and I managed to access kind of GP support and medication quite quickly and easily. That seemed to be the kind of first port of call. And then the next was psychotherapy, which I was working at the Telegraph at the time and was so lucky to have private health insurance. And so I managed to have private psychotherapy, which I will always be eternally grateful for. And then the third aspect was when I realised that my relationship with drugs and alcohol was really out of control. I found kind of recovery groups and meetings. So the support of other addicts and also friends and family was really crucial. But then the element which really took me by surprise and kind of knocked me off my feet to the point that I wanted to write a book about it was walking in the Walthamstow marshes in London. So connecting with nature for the first time really since childhood. And that came about because newly sober, I had a lot of time on my hands because I've been drinking pretty heavily since early adolescence. I found that I was experiencing very extreme highs and lows of emotion that I had almost never experienced really as an adult because I'd always drunk on them or planned to drink on them. So it was a really kind of mentally and emotionally tumultuous time when I was trying to stay sober a day at a time. I started running because, I knew already that could help me with endorphins. But then I was really drawn to this beautiful natural space in East London. And I found that the trees, the birds, the flowers, the smells, the changing seasons became almost like another drug. It kind of soothed my mind and my anger and my anxiety and all the stuff that was coming up in a way that, alcohol had done in the past. But of course it was preferable because it didn't leave me with a hangover. I wasn't prescribed it, and that's definitely something doctors are doing more. But, I obviously had this kind of intuitive sense that being outside could be good. So that became a kind of like a being born again, almost like oh my gosh, there's so much out there. And, connecting with nature isn't just, a nice thing. It actually feels like a really important therapy for me right now. So that was the trigger for losing Eden, and for me to want to drill down into the mechanism by which that contact with the living world seems to affect mental health. And so I wanted to find out what was happening to my brain, what was happening to my nervous system, why was it so effective, and if it's so effective, or if people find it so therapeutic, then why are we not doing more to protect it and to connect people to it?
Yeah, so was it something that you kind of stumbled upon, not knowing that it could or would be beneficial, or was it something that you'd heard might be beneficial and that drove you towards it?
No, it was more stumbling. So I guess it started with running because, I did know that could boost my mood. But then I would always want to run to this marsh, and I would end up walking for a lot of the run because I wanted to look at the coots and the moorhens or the cormorants or, the heron and so on. And then it kind of turned into more of like a nature walk run. So yeah, no one really recommended it to me. It felt almost like a kind of secret romantic relationship in some ways, because I just go there every day. I was working as a freelance writer at home at the time, and it felt like a really important thing that I needed to do every day. I could be on my own, but with other species, as it were. But yeah, I guess I do have, like, my mum lives in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, and my dad, really encouraged walking and so on when I was a kid. So I guess I always had a sense that the sea could be healing, or that there was something good out there. But I think, having lived in London, at that point I'd lived in London for like 10 years, and I was so disconnected from nature that it did feel really like this is a really different thing to do for me.
Yeah, I think that's quite a common thread of kind of young people these days, is that I know it especially happened with me that, I was super outdoorsy as a kid. I was part of Scouts. I lived in a quite rural area. I did walking and climbing and things. And then as I kind of went to university, I kind of lost that. And then I think a lot of young people move to London and lose that connection with nature. And I was lucky enough to go to university in Durham, which has some of the most beautiful beaches and kind of settings in the UK, but I kind of had no appreciation of that at the time. So do you think that is an issue, that young people are becoming more, I suppose, detached from the natural world?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the disconnection that you talk about, which happens in kind of adolescence and around uni or so, is common, and it's borne out in the kind of evidence of nature connection. Kids are into it, and then suddenly at some point in teenage years they're less into it, and then often they will come back later. And I guess, a lot of that kind of makes sense, that adolescence is a time of identity creation and experimenting. But I think that it also speaks to this kind of strange cultural idea that nature isn't very cool, that we have in our kind of society, that it's a bit kind of cringe or earnest, or, tree huggers are kind of, people will roll their eyes and so on, and like I certainly felt that when I was a teenager. Like I wanted to be in the pub or club or whatever. I would be embarrassed to be like taking my microscope out, as I love to do now. But certainly so I was really interested in researching kind of children and nature for Losing Eden, and I mean, it's quite astounding. I think children spend 12,000 hours in a classroom for their education. That was a figure that I was told by an eco-psychologist. And, you know, as soon as kids kind of get into primary school age, they're enclosed in these classrooms. And of course they have to learn, but we do disconnect our kids from the natural world gradually, because as a society we're so estranged, and that's a real problem and a real shame for so many reasons, from the mental health benefits to physical health to improved learning, confidence, risk taking, and so on. And one thing that research suggests is that if a kid is into nature, is exposed to nature as a child, it's much more likely that they will go on to have a relationship in adulthood. So they might become not very interested as a teenager, but then later on they will. So it's really important to give all children from all backgrounds the access to high quality green space, and you know, how the beauties and joys of the living world. And I think we could do much better at that as a society.
Something that really interested me in the book was reading about the forest schools, I think they're called, and that struck me as being something quite progressive and interesting. But reading the news and seeing that, you know, when kids do go back to school, I think they've done it in Denmark, primary school kids have gone back to school, but all the teaching is based where possible outside. So can you see a way that what's going on at the moment can actually help kind of reinforce our relationship with nature, and maybe make us take a look at the curriculums of schools and see where we can put more outdoors time, I suppose, but also more learning about nature?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and a kind of astute reading of what's happening. I think, it provides an opportunity for kind of looking at curriculums and how we educate and teach children, and look at possibilities to kind of evolve and look to our, for example, Scandinavian neighbours, whose children reap so many rewards from outdoor learning and kind of forest school happening constantly. At the moment, there is a growing movement of forest school, which is really exciting, and outdoor nurseries. And I think it's difficult for teachers because, you know, so they have so much to do, and, you know, schools are really, class sizes are so big, and the barriers to kind of thinking, oh, I'm not trained in outdoor learning or so on. But maybe this kind of tragic situation will kind of push teachers kind of off the diving board, as it were, and so, you know, learning outside actually isn't that difficult. My daughter goes to a mostly outdoor nursery, and it's going to be wholly outdoor now. And I mean, she's 3, so it's early years, but I'm really happy about that, because, you know, from researching Losing Eden, like the evidence for outdoor learning on personal, social development, confidence, and mental health and well-being is so strong. It just feels like if that could be built in to our education system, so many children would benefit from it, because you know, for many it's through school that they are exposed to the natural world. And also teachers might benefit as well.
That's something else I wanted to touch upon, is that, you know, at the moment when we're all locked in our houses, and or until the last week, we've had very limited time to go outside. For some people, I suppose, who live in more built up areas, going to school or walking to school or being at school might actually be their only interaction with the natural world, and something that you were writing about was the kind of need to publicize that outdoor space is kind of for everyone. And I suppose the coronavirus has kind of highlighted that, in that, you know, some people have found lockdown okay because, you know, they've got a beautiful big garden, but if you're kind of trapped in a tower block with no garden and not allowed outside, it can be much more difficult.
Absolutely. It's really exposed the inequality of access to the natural world, you know, in such a kind of stark way. The you know, the experience of being in lockdown with a garden to being in a high rise with no outdoor space is just massive. And, you know, to me, it just proves the fact that having some outdoor space and having access to high quality green space, parks and so on, should be just an essential human right in how we build our societies. And you know, the more research is published in this area, there's been a huge kind of mushrooming of quantitative evidence for nature contact and human mental and physical health over the last 20 or so years, which is kind of forms the backbone of Losing Eden, my book. But it seems like we still aren't quite grasping that in the way we build our cities and kind of live. So what I'm really hoping is that both with this kind of showing up of inequality, but also with this growing field of evidence, we'll see that it's just really unfair for people to live without contact with nature. One of the most interesting, multiple studies really, was of a couple of massive projects in Chicago called the Robert Taylor Homes, which became the site of some research by environmental scientists in the 90s. And they found that, so there was one block which had absolutely no trees or nature at all. So the people who lived there never saw nature. And then there was another block which had a few trees scattered around. And they found in their studies that those who lived in the apartments with views onto trees had much lower stress levels, higher well-being, fewer social issues. So that just shows even the presence of a few trees can have a measurable effect on human life. I guess before I wrote Losing Eden, I might have thought that nature and so on is a specific hobby. Like, some people are into it. It's quite privileged and elitist in a way, maybe. Like, I like it, my other friends don't like it, that's fine. But in fact, what I came to believe through reading all the science and research was that even background nature where you live is really important. So nature connection and a deeper relationship with nature does equate to higher mental health benefits, but just living on a street with a tree-lined street, or having a park with higher biodiversity that you can walk through to get to the shop, that has measurable effects on human individual health and population health. So yeah, I think it's like a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And so you kind of started to talk about it a little bit there. Were you, I suppose, I don't know if skeptical is the right word, but I'll use it, were you skeptical about the benefits of things like ecotherapy, of kind of forest bathing, or even, just lining roads with trees? Were you skeptical about how powerful that could be for people's mental health before you started writing?
Yeah, I was quite skeptical. I guess, being mostly a science journalist at that time, I was used to writing articles and reports and so on, which were kind of scientifically rigorous, and that was that was the kind of baseline that I wanted for Losing Eden, was that everything that I covered or included would be kind of rigorous and empirical and good science. And I was skeptical because, whereas I'd had this kind of nature epiphany, many people I knew didn't go to the woods for their relaxation on a weekend. They had lots of different ways of soothing themselves and getting out of their heads. And also, I was aware of this idea of the nature cure and how complex it is and how dangerous it is to kind of say to someone, go for a walk and you'll feel better, or propping up nature connection as a cure-all when it's clearly not. So yeah, there were lots of kind of hesitations I had and skepticisms I had. I think I went into it at the beginning thinking maybe contact with nature or nature-based interventions more formally, which are GPs are starting to prescribe things like woodland therapy or horticultural therapy for people with mental illness. I may have thought, yeah, maybe this would be work for kind of depression and anxiety, but could it touch the sides with the more severe mental illnesses such as schizophrenia or psychosis? And one of the trips that I took was to a medium secure unit, and I sat down with probably like the two most unwell people I've ever met in the garden there, they're both kind of patients, but also they're in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And I talked to them about how gardening helps them, and the horticultural therapists there as well, who've been working there for a long time. And it became pretty clear to me that contact with nature isn't just a kind of like elite narrow thing. Actually, it's a really big deal, and it has kind of wide ranging iterations which can help different people at different times. So yeah, I think whereas I probably started as a skeptic, and probably the first drafts I turned in were maybe a bit more skeptical, or hedging my bets a little bit. The accumulation of the evidence as it kind of built up, I kind of realised, this, I'm sold, and I'm totally sold on this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Has the reaction to it been what you expected? As in, has it been, are people coming at it from the same point of view that you did and been turned around, or are there people that kind of just stick their head in the sand and say, this is just kind of green kind of eco stuff that can't have a benefit?
Yeah, I didn't really have any expectations, to be honest. I think that's kind of generally a good lesson in life. I've been surprised and really heartened by people writing to me and saying, I've been reading your book and it's kind of inspired me to go out straight away, and to kind of be outside, and I've already felt the benefits. I didn't expect it to have that kind of tangible effect maybe on people. That's been really cool. There was a review that was really interesting to me, which kind of focused on it being a book about eco-dread, and I think it said something like, I was overemphasizing our negative relationship with the natural world, and I found that really interesting. I think that it's maybe for certain people maybe a bit of a threatening idea that our relationship with nature is dysfunctional. I mean, that's definitely the kind of perspective that I'm coming from, that we're in a kind of fossil fuel addicted society, which is unconsciously destroying the natural world. And that's not something which we want to do, and that it'd be better if we could think of a different way of living. But yeah, I guess I don't know, I found that interesting.
Yeah, I don't think I didn't get that impression that it was kind of eco dread at all. I think it's really interesting to bring up, and it's not something that I'd studying within climate change. It's not something that I'd actually particularly thought of, was the negative impacts that climate change could have on people's mental health. And something I found really interesting was when you wrote about the studies that looked at Inuit populations in Greenland, and how the melting ice there is impacting, it's kind of pervasive over their whole way of life. So naturally it's going to have an impact on their mental health.
Yeah, that kind of field is really quite new, of course, because the effects are only being kind of measured and so on. So I feel like I kind of scratched the surface of that, but it felt like a really important area to bring in, because lots of people will be suffering the effects of being on the front line of climate change, and the effect of that on their mental health. Was it, when you picked up the book, was it what you expected, or did it kind of surprise you in any way?
I was surprised that I didn't really think it was going to talk about climate change, which kind of interested me, because I kind of thought it'd be much more about what you can do kind of immediately to help your mental health, and why it helped other people, which I suppose the kind of first part of the book was. But the aspects around climate change I found really fascinating, and I find it really interesting that there has been a little bit of a pushback against people. I suppose it's kind of that it threatens the way that they're living their lives, that saying stuff like saying that we do need a change, and that actually the way we treat our natural world is harming people's mental health. It kind of threatens the way people are living, and kind of makes them push back on it harder, because it feels like an attack on them, but that's not really what it's trying to do at all.
Yeah. What area of climate change are you studying in?
So my background was geography and then climate change, and now I look at how it's basically modeling snowfall in ski areas, and how that is impacted under different global warming trends. But a really interesting thing, one of the most interesting things I found, is that a lot of the owners of the ski resorts are like unbelievably reticent to talk about climate change. They just want to put it right to the back of their minds.
Wow.
Or even say that it's not happening, because as soon as they start to say that it is happening, they're obviously admitting a vulnerability and exposing themselves to losing money. But then at the same time, they use climate change as a justification to build kind of new adaptive infrastructure like snowmaking and stuff.
Wow, how fascinating.
So I suppose it's kind of a similar thing. It's a kind of threat to their existence, so they want to push back against it, and they don't want to be seen as being culpable, and they don't want to be seen as being affected by it. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, I think that the human capacity for denial is unreal. We're very good at it, aren't we? And kind of denial of climate change, which I guess we're all implicit in that in some way. As much as I try and reduce my carbon footprint and live like a low carbon lifestyle, I'm clearly in denial in some way.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
The defense mechanism as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason that climate change, it's interesting that you didn't expect the climate change thing. Reading Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything was the reason why I moved from kind of more arts and culture journalism into environment and science journalism about like 7 or so years ago. So that book, and then learning more about climate change, has all, that was always kind of a big part of my thinking and the writing of Losing Eden. Definitely, I think about climate every day. So
yeah, and I think it's probably not it's not as much of a pervasive worry in my cohort, but I think that kind of eco anxiety is like a real genuine thing amongst people who are a bit younger than me, and something that can kind of quite easily be just dismissed as, like, I suppose, teenagers and young people being a bit kind of eco and green. But like, did you find anything about that kind of, like, the eco anxiety side of things?
Well, that it's certainly on the increase, and that, one of the areas I found quite interesting was like the linguistics around kind of climate change and biodiversity loss and mental health. So it kind of felt like when I started this, there were, like, eco anxiety wasn't really so much a mainstream term.
Yeah, I'd not really heard of it until the last kind of, I suppose, couple of years, I think.
Yeah, right. And there's this guy called Glenn Albrecht, who is a really great environmental philosopher based in Australia, in a place which has seen, like, really, really high temperatures. And he has been coining new words to help people kind of make sense of the psychological effects of climate change. And one of his words is solastalgia. Have you heard that?
I've read it in the book, but I don't think I can remember what it means.
So it's a feeling of kind of mourning and nostalgia for a place that is lost. So, like you were saying when you mentioned the Inuits that I write about, the loss of kind of ecological place and how that affects kind of the mind and the spirit. And there's like a bunch of really great different words that he's kind of coined, but there's also things like, climate dread and eco alienation and species loss. Species disconnection. I don't know. So do you find that? So do you not have much eco anxiety in your kind of climate change academic world?
I'm not sure I do particularly. I suppose it goes back to what we're saying. I find it quite easy to disconnect from it, I suppose, to see it as a kind of long-term thing that might not affect me. And although I find it very interesting, I've only recently just started making kind of adjustments to my lifestyle because of it. I think it's really interesting with the kind of, I think especially with indigenous people, so like Aboriginal people in Australia, Inuit people in Greenland, and Sami people in the kind of Arctic, that their kind of way of life is so dependent on climatic conditions. And so, for example, the Sami people, they're traditional reindeer herders, and the ways that the routes that they take to herd their reindeers are being destroyed because the ice isn't permanent there anymore. So it's completely uprooting their kind of way of life, and it just seems to be kind of almost completely inevitable that that's going to have some kind of psychological impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's going to be the kind of, the extreme end of that. I mean, I suppose in a way, in the UK with the flooding and the loss of houses and homes, we're seeing effects, and people losing their livelihoods, and I suppose that could be kind of an early effects in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of to start wrapping things up, I suppose, how do you think the future of integrating nature into the kind of mental health treatment and kind of, I suppose, also kind of mental health prevention as well, how does it look?
Sure. I think in Losing Eden, I call for more of a kind of biopsychosocial model of healthcare, which lots of doctors have been calling for a while.
And that's starting to come, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and kind of bringing together the mental and the physical, not kind of separating them through different doors, as it were. Saying that, I think that, the way we design our towns, cities, villages, urban areas is really important. So building kind of housing estates that have the rest of nature incorporated into them, making sure everybody has access and opportunities to connect in high quality green space. Education, as we already kind of touched upon, there's quite exciting plans for like a GCSE in natural history. The number of outdoor nurseries, as I say, is growing. Forest school. But I think, even things like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's no mow May. So I think quite a lot of councils are not mowing, and obviously lots of like local government are busy on COVID. So there does seem to be less mowing down of like road verges and so on.
Yeah, I think that's probably something that comes back to education around these issues, because I think a lot of people would think that, keeping their lawn kind of prim and proper is doing a good thing for the environment, and weeding is, is weeding out stuff that shouldn't be there, whereas actually, letting your grass grow a bit and letting those kind of smaller flowers and weeds grow is actually so key for maintaining a balanced ecosystem.
Exactly. And I think, it's kind of crazy, isn't it, when you think, right, we're in a biodiversity crisis, we've lost however many pollinators, insects, bees, and yet we have astroturf, and our lawns are like a cultural symbol still, and we mow our road verges, which could be filled with wildflowers to provide food for pollinators. I think education's really key for that, but I think it is our estrangement, and I totally count myself in that. I'm very plant blind and tree blind, and it's only in recent years that I've really started taking notice of what's in my natural environment and what's around me. And that just seems to be the kind of the basic perception that we're starting from, which is that it's all about the public interest and kind of control, and
maybe it's also a kind of perception thing, as in we kind of perceive that an overgrown verge on the side of a road is, a sign of kind of laziness or disorganized, or we see it as kind of messy, whereas if we let it grow out a bit and a few more wildflowers came into it, it might look, well, it would look more beautiful and would be more beneficial than just having a mowed patch of lawn.
Definitely. Yeah, I think a lot of it is a kind of aesthetic preference and like generation as well. Like I'm trying to rewild a patch of land behind our houses with my neighbours, which has been such an antidote to my eco anxiety. But one of my much older neighbours in his 80s had kind of said, oh, we're going to make it all nice and neat, the garden. And we were kind of thinking we just, let nature go for it and put some wildflowers down or whatever. But it was quite interesting to listen to him and think, for him, actually, a wildflower meadow maybe doesn't equal something that's restorative. It's really complex. But then at the same time, we don't have much time. The trends are as they are, that the decline in population and numbers is stark. We've got to make a change pretty soon.
Just the last question, how do you, or I suppose how at the moment are you looking after your mental health? What are the things that really work for you? I think I might know what you're going to say here.
Well, I guess, I probably, before writing and researching this book, I might have thought having a long walk every day was a bit indulgent, but now we go for a walk for a couple of hours, me and my young family, and it's just kind of sacred. I know that I'll feel so much better afterwards. I also take meds at the moment and check in with people. Sleep's really important to me. I've got a baby, so it's going to be quite tricky, but as much as I can. But yeah, and I think in the last few weeks it has been like really trying to notice the nature in my local environment. So really trying to look and see. I find that kind of akin to meditation and mindfulness.
I was saying that I used to be, when I was a kid, I used to be really outdoorsy. One of my things was I used to be absolutely obsessed with butterflies, which, as you can imagine, as like a 13, 14, 15-year-old boy, you try and hide that a bit. But
no.
Actually, like the last couple of weeks, I've dug out all of my old butterfly books and I've been trying to identify and tick off all the species that I can find. So I've definitely found that as a real kind of soothing process.
Yeah, that's so nice. It's worth it, isn't it? I mean, it's magic out there. It really is.
And I also find like when you're forced to slow down, like we have been at the moment, and you just look at, like I can see a tree out my window now. Normally I would just glance straight past it and you don't notice anything. But the longer you look at it, the more kind of small birds that you find, butterflies, it completely changes when you slow down and look at things.
Yeah, there's a real difference between looking and seeing. I go to like this local urban cemetery quite a lot with my 3-year-old, and the other day she was like, let's go and get this tree, and I was like, nah, it looks boring. And then she was like, come on, and we got closer and closer, and we could hear like buzzing and smelling nectar, and it was covered in pollinators. And I totally just like discounted it, when actually it was this kind of abundant tree full of life. And I think we just get, everything's accelerated in our modern lives, isn't it? Or we're looking at our phones. We miss a lot.
The stuff you can see outside is so much more interesting.
Yeah. And now we know that, spending time with that stuff, the rest of nature, it's not just nice, it's proven to have mental health and well-being benefits. So, it's not just like a frill or an indulgence. It's actually, a important potential therapeutic pathway.
Brilliant. Lucy, that's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much.
Hi everyone. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a quick note to say that although the things Lucy and I talked about we may find helpful, we are not trained medical professionals. If you're struggling with your mental health, please contact your GP or an organisation like Samaritans on 116 123.